everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. Today's guest is the frontman of an indie rock band based in Athens that released an incredible album last year called Music in an Emergency. Before we get the episode started, please make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to follow me at Parker Whirling and at @OnThatNote_podcast on Instagram. And on that note, please welcome Matt Martin from Wanderwild. I'm sitting here with Matt Martin, one of the members of the indie rock band based in Athens called Wanderwild. Thanks for joining me for an episode of On That Note. I've been listening to your newest album, Music in an Emergency, which came out May in 2021. I always typically like to start off the episodes asking about the newest project, the release, the writing and recording process. I would love to know, just in terms of this particular album, was there anything different about the writing and recording process that was maybe, unique to this compared to your previous releases?
Definitely. They're all a little bit different. Our band has taken on a bunch of different forms and operated in different ways over the years. But obviously this was a pandemic record, so that dramatically shaped the whole process leading up to this record. We put out an album called Sleep Tight Socialite in 2019, and that album was very much, like 4-piece rock, minimal overdubs. There's some synths here or there, but it was mostly guitars. We cut a lot of the basic tracks live. And then for Music in an Emergency, we kind of shifted back into like a little more of a like traditional modern workflow where things are multi-tracked and the demo kind of turns into the final recording. But the biggest fork in the road was I was kind of writing songs by myself for the first time in a really long time because of the pandemic. And, we still saw each other to a degree, and like we pretty quickly, right when lockdown happened, established like our crew as like sort of an insular ring. But even still, I was writing songs by myself for the first time in a long time. So that definitely changed just the workflow and the types of songs that got written. So a lot of it was, just started in my house during lockdown. But there are other tracks that predated the pandemic for sure that we started before that. But I would say that album is Music in an Emergency. It's as collaborative as any of them, but I'd say the collaborations happened at different points in the process as opposed to being like baked into the very origin of each song. It was a little more of like me starting stuff and then the guys coming in and making contributions once the foundation was already laid.
What were some of the pros and the cons with all of a sudden having to shift to writing mainly by yourself instead of with this group of guys that, you're practically family at this point?
Right. Man, I would say the pros for me were that I just got to kind of find my voice again as a songwriter, like what my output sounded like. I prefer writing with other people most of the time, and I love the collaborative spirit that's like ingrained in our band. But it was really cool to be like, hey, actually, I can do this by myself too. Like this is it was just encouraging, and not to say that the people around you can become a crutch, but you get used to leaning on people certain ways, and that Taylor's super good at figuring out a melody for a bridge, and like Reagan's really good at the lyric for the pre-chorus, and like Wes is really good at reimagining the rhythm section, and so without having that at your disposal, you just have to sort of problem solve in different ways. So I would say that was a pro, is just the forced learning. But I guess that pro is also a con. You definitely hit walls, I would say, sooner when you're working on your own. At least I do. And I feel like I'm just sharper when other people are in the room in general, when I have someone to bounce ideas off of and someone to help me focus and get excited with and chase the thing down. So I'd say the con is that it's a little less direct. You know, when you get the four or five of us in a room all together, I mean, we very regularly will start with nothing, and like at the end of the day we have this song that we're super proud of. Whereas I would say with Music in an Emergency, it was more chipping away over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's funny how those walls you hit when you're writing a song with anyone, but especially by yourself, can be frustrating, but they also can be viewed as opportunities to learn something about your own process and how you handle shit like that. You know, you maybe figure out, all right, well, a bridge here could be interesting, but I don't really have something cool. And you start to kind of go crazy a little bit sometimes when you're by yourself. And, you got to figure out how to get through that. And then once you do, you might learn something about the way you like to create or the way you don't like to create. Was there any any fear in a way after writing all these songs by yourself, showing them to the group after being so used to everybody working together? Maybe when you're working together, people kind of chime in quickly if they have a better idea or if they're like not as much into something. But after spending so much time and effort into one song or a few songs that you've done by yourself, it's like bearing your soul. And of course, you trust them because they're your bandmates. But that can be probably a little scary, right?
Oh yeah, it's vulnerable for sure. I feel like it especially happens when sending like the first draft of a lyric melody, a vocal part, because we often will write songs instrumentally and then essentially just top line them, figure out what the vocals do later. And yeah, that can be really vulnerable, especially because we have this thing that we're really excited about instrumentally, and you don't want to screw it up vocally, and you have this pretty high bar to live up to with the instrumental being so great and so exciting. So yeah, for sure, it is vulnerable, but I don't know. We're all pretty, like you mentioned, we're all pretty comfortable with each other at this point. And I also should be just clear about the fact that it wasn't, thankfully, it wasn't the entire record that was made like kind of me by myself. It was really like the last sort of like half of the record, not sequentially, but like the last half of the batch of songs that made it an album that like pushed us over the edge. That were written kind of by myself. There were a few other tracks that we had started before the pandemic, and like there's a song called "Tap Me Back" that Taylor wrote pretty much totally by himself. So there are a mix of workflows, but songs like "Stranger" and "I'll Be Right There," and "On a Dime" lyrically and melodically for sure. But again, even "On a Dime," I know I'm just tossing out titles now, but "On a Dime" was one that we started before the pandemic as a unit. So yeah, it's interesting. It was, like I said, really just that last push that felt like I was kind of on my own a lot.
Very interesting. Do you
Yeah.
think that going into the future, there are any lessons either from writing and recording, doing all this, that you've learned from this particular project that you guys want to take into the future projects?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that we learned is that doing, like, so I moved to Nashville, and we haven't quite unpacked yet what it looks like to write songs kind of from a distance yet, because I just got here. I've only been here for like a month. But I do think because of the way we made Music in an Emergency, or at least the way we finished it, it was encouraging with me coming here that we could do the sort of remote, like send stuff back and forth kind of workflow. Because in a way, that process was mirrored when we were finishing Music in an Emergency. So I think, yeah, the experience of just not having the luxury of all of us being in the room nearly all the time, that allowed us to become a little more nimble, a little more versatile, and a little more flexible. So I would say that's like the lesson, if you will, that we're going to apply to future releases.
Just being more flexible, like figuring out how to go about situations instead of sticking to the same thing, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, but then again, it's all just part of the natural progression of things. Like I mentioned, there was an era of this band where we were very much four people in a room live tracking stuff in the studio together. That would have been that like the Sleep Tight era. And since then, it's been a lot more. I guess that still happens, but it's just I don't know. It's just a different energy. Things change. Our band's never really had the same process for more than like a year or two, honestly.
Yeah.
So again, it's sort of baked into the thing to change and to not even reevaluate, just sort of follow the natural flow of things.
Yeah, and that makes sense. It doesn't even have to be like this intense reflection period. It can just be this thing where you just go with the flow and, check in with everybody and make sure everything's all good, but it doesn't have to be like, all right, now that we're done with this record, how are we going to approach the next one? It just kind of happens and you follow that lead.
I guess the main reason for that is that we don't operate under the traditional model of like I'm the songwriter and I deliver stuff to the guys and then we hash it out as a band and that's how we make records. That's just not really how we work. In the very beginning it kind of worked that way, and that is now an option for us. Like that does happen, but that's not the only way we function, which is why I think it's very nimble. It's just sort of like, okay, what is happening? Am I like writing stuff more on my own? Are we being more collaborative? Like, are we collaborating on lyric and melody? Are we collaborating on instrumental? It's always changing, which I like. It's dynamic and fun.
Yeah, it's cool to be able to trust everyone in the group, knowing that everybody has kind of full, like a full respected opinion, and that you can hear each other out. And if something seems to not be working, then you can say that and discuss it and figure out how to keep going about it. But also, people know when something isn't maybe up to them, and it's, you can just say an opinion and it's all good. If it's not quite understood by everyone, it doesn't really have to be, but it's just that mutual
Yeah.
respect and love for each other, knowing like this is going to turn out the way it's supposed to, and we're all trying to do this together.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really true. It's all about getting the right people in the room, and thankfully with this band we have that, and everyone is really diverse and in their talents and their skill sets. I mean, you could hire anyone in our band to produce your record, and it would be great, And everyone can write. So that's the beauty of it. Is like while I do sort of function as this like final filter, more often than not, because I'm surrounded by people that I love and whose opinions I value, I don't really have to filter much, which is awesome. I love that.
Yeah, that's a perfect situation. Is there any song or songs on this newer album, Music in an Emergency, that you're particularly proud of?
Mm. I think one that comes to mind immediately is Takes Two.
Mm-hmm.
And that song has a cool origin story. Definitely predates the pandemic. It was 2019, and we were planning on going to South by. And long story short, we had a bunch of stuff fall through. A bunch of shows we thought were confirmed ended up not being confirmed. But we all had this like week off, and we're like, well, what the heck do we do with this? Like, we could have gone to Austin and played a few shows, but we would have had a really lean schedule, and it wouldn't have probably been worth the headache. So we were like, okay, well, what if we just went somewhere and tried to record and write for a few days? So we spent a week up in near Jasper, Georgia, in North Georgia. My wife's family has this incredible like mountain lake house situation. It's actually a community. It's called Tate. And we actually didn't even stay at my wife's family's house. We stayed at like their family friend's house, which is pretty wild that they opened up their house to us.
Yeah.
But it was the off season. It was March, so no one was there anyway. Anyway, we like brought all our gear and set up shop in this really gorgeous, like, calling it a cabin is it's like a big fancy cabin kind of vibe. And we set up in this big living space with like vaulted ceilings, and we had this like really magical, I think it wasn't quite a week, it was like 5 days. We had this like really magical 5 days. And Takes Two was one of the ideas that was born out of that experience. And we recorded the whole instrumental that week. We wrote and recorded the instrumental. And it's pretty, like I mentioned, it's pretty common for us, like, top line stuff after the fact. That one was really hard to figure out vocally, though. Just a really different kind of track. And I love where we landed. I think it's got some real magic in it. So, yeah, that song and a song called In Repeat, which is not on this record, but was a single we put out at the very beginning of 2020. Both of those songs came from that cabin week. But yeah, Takes Two, I think we're all really proud of. There's a lot of really cool, unique DNA from all of us in that song.
Yeah, that I do like that one. It is funny how the way a song turns out can be just as much of a factor into how proud you are of that song as the experience you had doing it, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the experience was a big part of that one. But, I mean, at the same time, we have a lot of, for better or for worse, like, we have a bunch of stuff sitting in Dropbox that we have very fond memories of making, but just for whatever reason never quite get finished or released. And, you know, those moments are important. You're not going to bat 100. So it's good to just keep making stuff and figure out which ones stick.
Yeah, of course. And speaking of, recording and producing in the cabin, like, you guys do all your own stuff in-house pretty much. And you had a studio in Athens, right?
Yes. Yep. It's called Gift Horse.
What's it? Gift Horse?
Gift Horse. So they're now actually doing some updates to the space. Because it was me and two other guys that ran it. And I also had a home studio set up, and I'm now sitting in like my new studio in Nashville, which is most of the way ready. It's almost there, but I've already started mixing here, which has been really, really fun. I haven't really tracked anything yet. But yes, we do everything
in-house, or is it a separate building?
It's in my house. It's in the lower level, so it's a split level. House was built in the 70s. And I've got most of the bottom level. So I've got essentially 3 rooms down here. Like this room I'm in, there's an adjoining room, and then a room down the hall that I have like drums and guitar amps in. So it's like an above ground basement, if you will, which is pretty rad.
Yeah, that's really sick. So yeah, you guys have had a lot of experience recording, mixing, producing your own songs, like, by yourselves, not necessarily going to somebody's studio and having somebody else engineer it and produce it. What has that been like for you guys, and how do you feel like that in particular has had an impact on the way y'all's music has come out over the last however many years of just being you guys?
Yeah, it is very insular, which it serves us really well. It's funny. It's just that's how it's always been. I don't know any other way, for this band at least. So it'd be fun we'd be open to working with outside people at some point. But kind of like I mentioned, the beauty though of this group of people is everyone thinks like a producer. So, like, it's not always on me to have to come up with production ideas, even though I'm sort of like leading the charge, and I'm the one like, setting up mics and yes, I deal with the mixing and all that. But just from the creative side of things, I have the other guys to lean on, which is great. It allows us to it allows us to execute. It allows us to have an idea and say, let's go to the studio and let's make it. And boom, like I said earlier, sometimes, 24 hours later, we have something we're really proud of. We're not relying on anybody else's schedule or anybody else's space, or and obviously there's a huge financial component to it as well, because making records
Yes.
is not cheap.
Yes.
And that has been such a gift that we can make things freely. It's like not even part of the conversation. Like, how do we budget for this? It's just, hey, can we all be there, you know? And that's the only barrier to entry is our time. So very thankful for that.
Yeah, that is a really huge component, I would think. I was talking with Taylor and Will from Hefner, and they were saying, I asked them what I thought made Athens in particular a thriving music scene, and Taylor's answer, kind of surprised me and wasn't something I've heard before, which was a little bit more of a practical statement, and it's that just affordability in Athens in general. I mean, of course, housing and things like that are a little bit cheaper, but studio time is cheaper. And there's nothing cheaper than having your own studio and not having to like pay somebody else to come, to record it for you. But there's got to be something. I mean, I haven't really done that recently. Like, I have stuff in my little home studio that I can work with, but I really enjoy the process now after doing it a couple times of going to the studio and having like someone who is familiar with everything be able to set everything up the way that will kind of yield the result of what I want, instead of me with, having to do that with a lot less knowledge. I guess where I'm at is it's really nice to, and to support them by paying them to keep doing what they're doing and helping other people. But once you guys put yourself in that situation where you have to figure it out, I mean, you learn quickly, and then you can execute over the years, right? And then you don't have to worry about paying other people and worrying about if some producer, if they last minute cancel or if they have a schedule change or what have you.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I mean, the downside of there not being any money on the line is sometimes it's almost easy to flake when there's less
Yeah.
accountability. There's less accountability. Because when you commit to somebody else, this is like the total flip side of what I just said. But when you commit to somebody else's schedule and there is money on the line, you're gonna show up and you're gonna
Yep.
squeeze out every drop that you can.
Yes.
But if there's nothing to lose by, we're gonna work a half day today, or like one of our guys like forgot to ask off work, like that kind of thing. That happens all the time, and it's totally okay. Yeah, it is a little bit different. Sometimes it's not taken as seriously when it's just when it's totally DIY. But the good news is like this is what I do professionally, and like my production engineering career and like the band's career have kind of been developing in parallel, which is really amazing. So for me, it's all kind of part of the same experience in that like I'm a better producer because of this band and this, and vice versa. They both are mutually informing, and I get better at one that makes me better at the other, and the whole thing. So it works out well.
When you're producing with other people or for other people, is there a different mentality you go into it with?
Not consciously, but yeah, on some level, definitely wearing more hats when we're doing Wanderwild stuff, because I'm thinking about the lyric and the melody and the song and the guitar tone and the whatever. Whereas, when I'm working with another artist, I can sort of hone in a little bit more and specialize a little bit more. It's not all on me to deliver the final thing. But like I said, it's never really all on me because thankfully I have the other guys in the band. But I would say not consciously. It's a relatively similar process, but it's a good lesson by working with lots of other artists. I've gotten to learn um, ways to help people get out of their own way, because that's a lot of the challenge in the studio, is just being in your head about things and doubting yourself, and doubting a vocal performance, or whatever it is. And um, obviously, if something needs work, then maybe you don't want to be overly confident about it. But oftentimes people have brilliant ideas that they just need to pair with a little bit of confidence, and that will allow for a delivery that is compelling, and a song that people want to listen to. So that's been helpful for me to apply to like our own practice as a band, is to be like, hey, let's like get out of our own way. Let's not overthink it. Let's just do what feels right. And if all five of us think that it's cool, then it's probably cool.
So if you had an artist with you that you're producing their album or their single or whatever, and they're having some doubts or they're having a hard time shaking off some of the, you know, just the self consciousness, what might be a couple things you would do or say to get them out of their head?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of it is just helping to shift the energy in the room a little bit. A lot of it has to do with how you hold yourself. Um, just being calm and collected, um, and confident yourself. I think that rubs off on other people. It rubs off on those around you. If you feel like you don't know which way is up, um, that can often seep into the artist's mentality. So even if you don't know what the heck to do next, like that's the other funny thing about yeah, I mean, that's like Studio 101, right? Like the tape machine is breaking, but you're like in the talk back to the band, and you're like, hey guys, we're just doing a little bit of little bit of
We're just
a
setting
little
up
bit
back
of
here.
yeah, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So you can kind of apply that beyond maintenance failure, gear failure, and apply that more creatively. Uh, and I think that goes a long way. But also just being encouraging, being kind, but also being understanding, because it's a very it's a tender headspace being in the studio sometimes, especially if you don't do it all the time. And like in any conversation or relationship, you don't want to belittle someone's feelings. So giving it space to be valid, and say, hey, totally get why you feel XYZ way, but here's like maybe a way we can get out of that and move forward.
Yeah. What's also interesting about being a producer that I've learned from talking to producers is obviously most people, they would think, okay, they're the one who is, setting up things to record, talking about ideas for production choices and all the technical aspects of things. But the other thing that most people wouldn't necessarily think about is working with an artist who's bringing you a song that could be incredibly personal to them for a lot of reasons. Maybe it's something even traumatic, and suddenly you found yourself discussing a very, very vulnerable situation with an artist, and it's probably almost like you have to adopt, some sort of therapeutic techniques to talk with, communicate with someone who's going or has gone through something very intense, and then on top of that, you have to figure out how to make all that shit sound good.
Yeah, it can be a deep job, man. It can be a deep gig, but I mean that's the beautiful thing about music, is it's just provides people with a platform to be vulnerable, and we've normalized that on some level, which I think is such a great thing. It's like kind of normal and okay to talk about your deepest darkest fears inside of a song, and people don't really bat an eye at it. I mean, obviously, like if something's really dark and you like show your mom, she might be worried, blah blah blah. But
Yeah, yeah.
and like generally speaking, it's like it's a safe space, and I'd like to think that the studio is also a safe space. So yeah, it's almost shocking how casual those moments can be. Like the weight of those moments are almost just like glossed over somehow, and then you listen back to the performance in the song like a day or two later and you're like, holy shit, I'm gonna cry. And sometimes in the studio you do feel the weight of it as well, and that actually can be really magical. But I'm amazed at how often it just feels like another day at the office, and the artist does too. It's like everyone's like, yeah, this is just a song, it's no big deal, and it's deeply, deeply emotional.
Right. And I feel like maybe, obviously not for everyone, but maybe for me, when I do write some songs that are a little bit more personal about certain situations, that the actual writing down of the song and figuring it out is what helps me and probably some other artists get through it, so that when they do bring it to a producer to you know, get all recorded, it's like they've already gone through that process initially. Sometimes some things take a long time to really get through, but at least you've already gone through that, maybe like that self-confrontational part already, so that you can sort of set aside some self-consciousness that might come with discussing this with someone maybe you don't even know, right? I mean,
Totally.
how many artists you've never met until they come into the room.
Yeah, so long as you can tap back into that feeling when you're performing a take.
Yeah, and that's scary.
Right, which is also scary. But no, you're totally right. I mean, it's almost never going to be as emotional as the moment it was inked, like the moment it came out of you. That you're right. That is the most vulnerable. Well, maybe not the most vulnerable part, because sharing it is a different experience. But no, you're totally right. But oftentimes, by the time you're in the studio, you've learned to make it feel comfortable.
Right. I do want to shift gears just a little bit, because I found out that you are the touring bassist for Coin, which is, I mean, if people don't know them, they're very successful, at least in my eyes, indie band. And I just thought that was really cool, because there's a handful of songs that I really like by them. That must have been a really cool experience to be touring with them. What have you learned from, working with them, and what kind of advice would you give from artists based on some lessons that you maybe have learned from those experiences?
Oh man, so much. Yeah, it's a real treat, man. I've been buddies with these guys forever. Like Ryan, the drummer, he and I go back to high school.
Oh, wow.
I met Joe like freshman year of college. Um, Chase shortly thereafter. So it's cool. I got to watch Coin from the ground up, like very first demos to today. And I started touring with them in 2018, right as their old bass player Zach was leaving. Um, so yeah, been with them for coming up on 4 years this year, which is pretty crazy. Um, but man, I've learned so much, and I've gotten to experience so much, and I'm so thankful for all of it. And obviously, the travel has been wonderful. Just getting to, play music in places that I never dreamed I would get to play music in, like Japan and Korea and London, and like this year we're getting to do a bunch of the iconic U.S. festivals, like Bonnaroo, Lollapalooza, Gov Ball, the whole thing. So yeah, I try not to take it lightly. It's cool. Um, Man, I would say I've kind of maybe already said it, but just holding things lightly as you can. It's just this very tender balancing act. I guess I'm speaking now about just being in a band and making records and making songs. It's like you have to care more than anyone else in the world, but then you also know how to turn that off and like literally not care at all. Like you have to be able to give things away freely and not obsess over the details once you have spent the time obsessing over the details. It's a really challenging balancing act, but that's been one of the most obvious lessons that I've learned, because so much goes into like the production of a Coin show, and of the records, because I've been lucky too to like be a part of the record making process to a degree. Um, and like on there's a new record coming out later this year, and like I got to mix 2 songs on it and record some stuff on a few tracks. And with the last one, Dreamland, it was kind of the same story. Recorded a few things, like got to mix a track, played on it. So so yeah, I've gotten a cool window into, being like hired gun plus. I don't just do the tours. I do a little bit extra. And they're like some of my best friends. So yeah, I've gotten to learn a lot about what it means to put on that show, to execute that level of production, to tour with like, a multi-member crew on a bus. It's like a traveling circus. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. So seeing behind that curtain has been really revealing and eye-opening, and I've gotten to apply lots of cool lessons from that to Wanderwild and to our show, and to just like making us, just more pro and more lean and more capable of executing at a level that we want to be executing at. But then also, yeah, in the record making process, it's just been a good reminder of, the guys are the coin guys are so creative, and they're so particular and but like I said, in a way that means that I think obviously I have a huge bias, but I mean, I feel like in their lane they're making some of the coolest music out there, and a lot of that has to do with the attention to detail and the artistry and just the sheer time spent. There's just a real magic in what those guys can make. So but then I've also witnessed the sort of pitfalls of, like we all go through as creatives, of holding on to things too tightly and having to learn how to let go. And again, that's something that the guys have navigated well. But by spending so much time with them, I've gotten to witness that whole process and what that's like to have this sort of lightning in a bottle and figure out how to like let the rest of the world experience it, and the fears and the joy and the vulnerability that comes with that.
Yeah, that whole attention to detail thing and the dance between caring so much and flipping it off and not caring at all is, to me, it's like you have to care so much about what you're creating for yourself, and understand that as soon as it's out there for anyone, like that's when you kind of probably have to shut it off, because you can't control other people's reactions to it, but you can't control everything and all the work that you put into it that makes you feel good. Because if you don't give it your all for yourself, then there's always going to be something missing that you wish later on you had changed.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's just never going to be perfect, whatever that means, and it's not supposed to be. So that's something to welcome. If it's too good, not too good. That's the wrong language, but if it's too perfect, it sometimes sucks the soul out of it. But yeah, man, and that's the beauty of having a great team around you. Hugely important. That's something that the guys have, which another way that I've learned tremendously. Just the value in like having great management and great people booking for you, and great people at, if you're on a label, like, I don't know, labels are an interesting topic, but the beauty of having a good team is you can turn your brain out. You can just be a creative and make the thing, and then send it off to like your team, and then turn your brain off a little bit, and then it's somebody else's job to help deliver that to the world and worry about things like marketing and the numbers and all that. Because that stuff can really, really get the best of you if you pay too much attention to it. So let it be someone else's job to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
If you have that luxury of having those people working for
that
you.
is the hard part right there, is getting to the point where you do have the luxury of people who are paid professionals to worry about that for you. And having mentioned labels just now, I think a lot of people might lump labels into that kind of category. What is your opinion on labels? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think they can serve an invaluable function, and be be a wonderful curator and community builder. There are a lot of modern labels, especially in like the indie sphere, that are doing really great things. You know, they're investing in exciting young artists, and like the splits are way more manageable. Like, you know, like 50-50 splits are more common than they've ever been, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, but at the same time, you know, labels are built on typically a handful of really successful acts, and then you have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of artists they'll lose money on. And so I guess the downside is figuring out how to, if obviously if you're successful and your label cares about you and wants to keep putting money into you, great, that's awesome. But if you end up on a label where the numbers aren't looking quite as good as maybe everyone would hoped, and it's easy to get lost, and it's easy for a label to sort of like hang on to a band on their roster because they have nothing to lose by hanging on to this artist, but they have nothing to gain in their minds by investing time and energy and resources into a smaller project. So it can be a little bit dangerous. I feel like that's where a lot of the horror stories come from with small bands signing to like a big label, where they feel like they get nothing out of it and didn't see a lot of return. But you know, it's interesting. This stuff things just cost a lot of money, and if a label can be functionally a bank for an up and coming artist, that's cool. But then again, you have to be careful about, you know, making sure you're not incurring debt. It's a whole bag, man. It's a whole bag. I guess my thought is it's it's not a golden ticket signing with a label. It doesn't really guarantee you anything. It can set you up for success, though. I do think they still can serve an important function, and just connectivity to the industry at large. You know, and by that I mean producers, songwriters, management, booking, all of these pieces of the puzzle that make up a good team. Typically what I've seen is there's usually one key player that comes along, and the rest sort of falls in line. So it's not always the label. Sometimes it's a manager. Sometimes it's a booking agent. But because the industry is so interwoven and these people talk, it can be helpful to like get in with a label to then build a team. But the same can be said about, like I said, a manager or whatever else. So yeah, man, I guess it's just really gray. It's really gray.
Yeah, there's no really easy way to answer that question, which is why I love asking artists that question, because there's
Yeah.
I get a lot of different opinions and perspectives on it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have very limited firsthand experience with labels. Virtually everything I've done has been fully independent. Which at times has been a choice, at times has been a necessity. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a right or wrong. I think, thankfully, I don't have like a hugely negative outlook on it because I haven't really been screwed over in a meaningful way, which is good. I'm thankful for that. But I mean, at the same time, there were certainly moments, I don't know. It's there's not exactly a lot being poured into like younger, specifically indie rock bands right now. That's not something that the industry is terribly interested in at the moment, seemingly. So it can be challenging to try to navigate things independently and just figure out how the money works and how the money flows without the backing of a larger organization. So I think at times the bands I've been a part of have craved it, but I also think that if I really look back and think critically, I think we might be better off that never worked out.
Right. It is one of those things, even for me still, even after talking to so many artists about it, the idea of a label is probably much more powerful than necessarily what can happen after. And that's not always true, of course, but I mean, you always hear about those classic stories where somebody gets signed to a label and they're just kind of left in the dirt. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, maybe they sign with like a really small indie label and their expectations are probably too high of what they can do for them. So it's really about how you manage your expectations. And like you said, there's that factor of a key player who comes in and can change everything, but it doesn't have to be a label. It could be a manager or a booking agent or even a producer that just really, really knows what they're doing and sets you up for success.
Yes, I think that's very true. Well said.
Awesome. Well, that's going to take us over to the last five, where I'm just going to ask you five quick questions and we'll be done.
Sweet.
All right. Number one, in the studio or playing live?
I mean, I'm a studio guy, but I feel less strongly about that currently than I have in the past. There have been moments where I've been like, live music, it's great. I've done it. Cool. I'm good. I don't know. This fall kind of invigorated me in a way. I mean, we just did a big coin tour, and Wanderwild played 6 shows on that very tour,
Oh, cool.
which was rad. So yeah, I got to do double duty, and just having the Wanderwild guys out is always such a treat. And they're buds with the coin guys. It's just such a good vibe whenever it gets to happen. And yeah, man, it was invigorating. So I'm still gonna say studio, but a little less severely than maybe I usually would.
Yeah. I love asking that because it's a very 50-50 response. Some people love playing live, some people love the studio. I typically say the studio, one, because I have a lot less experience playing live, at least recently. But the studio to me offers so much opportunity to create something that never existed ever anywhere for anyone, but also something that maybe in your own mind, a song that was just, you know, kind of okay or was something you loved, but have played it so many times by yourself that it has lost some luster, suddenly becomes this newfound, you know, amazing thing that you never expected you could have created because of one or a handful of production choices.
Yep, totally agree.
Question number two, what's a perfect album front to back?
The Strokes, is this it?
Yeah, of course. It's a classic response. I mean,
It just is.
you're totally right. If you had to say a second one of theirs, which one would be the closest second
Oh, the Strokes.
of the Strokes?
Room on Fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not that I haven't enjoyed later records, but
Did you like
they
the
had
new one?
had some. Yes, but it didn't stick with me very much.
Interesting.
Yeah, I liked it. I really did. In fact, it's funny. I feel like I don't know. I feel like this. What's it called again?
The new
The New Abnormal. There we go. The New
Amazing
Abnormal.
title, first of all.
Great title. I feel like it comes up in conversation with friends, like, I don't know, once a month, and I'm like, I need to go listen to that record again, and then I just forget to. So this time I'm
Yeah.
really going to. I'm gonna go listen to that record again.
There we go.
Because
Yeah.
it is a good record. I really dig it.
Yeah, I love it, and it was probably one of my favorite albums when it came out. I guess it was 2020. But I haven't listened to it recently either, so I'm gonna go back to it and check it out. But I just love how different it was compared to any other album of theirs.
Yes, I'll agree with that. And I really appreciated the production. I really appreciated this like sort of return to form, but in a very hi-fi presentation.
Yeah.
It was almost like they just, you know, harkened back to what they do best, but spent way more money on it.
Yeah, true. When you're working with Rick Rubin, I'm sure some money is being shelled out.
Yeah, it wasn't cheap.
No. Do you have any other perfect albums in mind that aren't the Strokes?
Perfect albums. I would say I would say In Rainbows is up there. Radiohead.
Yeah, I mean, you're barking up my tree. That's not a phrase,
Yeah,
but that's
I know what you mean. Yeah,
yeah, I fucking love that album. That's probably my favorite album ever of all time.
it's a miraculous album. Um, I love that record. Um, to go a little more like left of center, one album that I got like super obsessed with over the pandemic. There's this band called Ulrika Spacek. Have you heard of this band?
No.
It's it's so you. I'm gonna misspell it. It's even though it's like one of my favorite records. Ulrika, and then it's Spacek.
I'm gonna look it up right now.
Who knows even if that's how you say it? Ulrika Spacek. That's just what I have been doing. But they have this album called Modern English Decoration. It's this yellow cover,
I see it. Yeah.
yellow and black. That album is just unreal, man. It's just a vibe. It's a cruiser, you know, like you put it on and you listen to the whole thing. It's like I don't really seek out certain tracks typically.
Yeah.
I think it's so good. Another really good one is this band Land of Talk. Do you know that band?
I don't.
I'm just gonna give you some like weirder ones. This band Land of Talk. They put out a record same year, 2017, Life After Youth. I burned a freaking hole in that record the year it came out. I listened to it so much, and I would say that's a near perfect album as well.
Nice. I've got these on my list right now, so I'll have to check them out when we're done.
Yeah, check them out.
Question number 3 is, who's your dream artist or producer to work with?
I would say I'll give you an I mean, a modern one would be it'd be really insane to get to work with Kevin Parker,
Yeah.
Tame Impala. I feel like he has shaped so much of the sonic landscape of modern indie and pop. It's crazy, honestly. Currents did a whole number to what we're all doing musically.
Mm-hmm.
So Currents, Kevin Parker. I think it'd be so cool to get to work with Sonic Youth.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love just being these like titans of experimental guitar and just alternative music in general. I don't know. I think it'd be really cool to see what came out of a collaboration there. And then Paul McCartney, because
I mean, of course.
you know,
why
let's
not?
just take it all the way back.
Yeah, let's take it all the way.
I've also said Stevie Nicks to this question
Really?
on several occasions. Yeah. Again, it's just like a gut feeling. I'm like, something cool would happen. I don't really know what, but I feel like it'd be amazing.
She would do some sort of seance in the studio, put some black
Exactly.
magic on your song.
Yeah, exactly. So
Question number
those
4.
are my answers.
Yeah, no, all great answers. Question number 4 is going to be, what's on your musical rotation right now?
Right now, so that Ulrika Spacek album I was just telling you about, been listening to that. Also a similar vein, I just rediscovered Halcyon Digest by Deer Hunter.
Oh my God, yeah, one of my favorites.
God, that album is okay. Another like pretty much perfect album.
Yep.
And same with Microcastle, the one before it.
Yeah. Also.
Just love those records. A weirder one would be, there's this jazz harpist named Dorothy Ashby, and my wife came across it. I don't know how, but we have like there's like a modern pressing of this album Afro Harping from 1968. And dude, it is such a vibe. It is so cool. Like, unbelievably cool. Perfect like dinner party or cooking
Yeah.
or anything with food or beverage, like it pairs really well with. It's a
Was
great
it
pairing for
Dorothy who?
Ashby,
Ashby.
Ashby,
I see.
Dorothy Ashby,
Afro harping. What a name.
Afro harping. It's insane.
Oh wow, from 1968.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool, man. It's really cool. I'm trying to think of what else. I'm so often listening to what I'm working on
Yeah.
that I'm not always the best at staying on top of new releases. But I'd say that's a good answer. I'll stick with that.
Yeah, that was a good 3 or 4 right there. All right, last question here. What is your favorite decade of music?
2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like your 2000 to 2010 era. Just that whole like The Strokes New York indie thing that happened. All the Meet Me in the Bathroom bands.
Right.
If you get that reference.
Yeah, that's a book, right? Meet me in the
Yeah,
bathroom. Yeah. I
it's
was told
so
to read
sick.
it and I have not read it.
You really should. If you're a fan of The Strokes and like of that scene in general, oh my gosh, it's mind blowing.
That would be
It's
like
all it's
Interpol,
Yep.
yeah, yeah, yes, right? Maybe.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. As the National kind of came out of
Oh,
that
the National,
scene.
that's right. Is
Even
Animal
the
Collective
Walkman.
part of that? They were in
No.
New York, I know, but I didn't know if they were
LCD
really.
Sound System,
Oh yeah,
same thing. Like just all those bands, man, are like these like archetypal, unattainable like pillars of music to me.
right.
That's pretty big language. But um yeah, those are just man, those are just the bands I fell in love with as a teenager. And they shaped me tremendously. And I still love them, which is cool. There's obviously shit I listened to when I was a teenager that I don't think is cool anymore, but I'm thankful to have found some music that has really had staying power with me for that long because I just have such an emotional connection to it. So, yeah, 2000s.
Yeah, it's hard to shake the music that becomes so integral to you and like the way you grow up. That's why I say 2010s because that's really when I started really more of like 2013 on. I started really paying attention to music a little bit more in a different way. Um, and it just became such a part of me that like I feel like I have to say that because it all of a sudden was so much that I cared about in life. And some people, when they go through that, I feel like maybe it just happens to be like they're listening to a lot of 70s, and that
Mm-hmm.
becomes what they kind of cling on to in a way. But if I didn't have to say 2010s, I'd probably say like early 70s, late
Mm.
60s. It's kind of hard to just say like all the 70s or all the 60s because like 65 below, I don't really listen to as much. It's like, once the Beatles started like, changing everything with Revolver, it was like that's when I thought music started to get like really insane.
Totally. Oh my god, I mean, so much happened in, I mean, really, every decade, right? But I
Yeah,
mean,
of
dude, like
course.
the invention of like modern popular music in the
Mhm.
'60s is just unreal. And yeah, there's so, man, it's something that I've really learned to appreciate is the value in going back in time a bit and spending time with older records and stuff that's a little left of center and I'm not like a totally heady vinyl geek. I mean, I have like a cool setup and we love listening to records, but I don't work at a record store. But like, I think it's cool. Like find something weird that your local record store owner likes and give it a spin and you'll always learn something.
Yeah, it is really cool to go back in time and see how creative people were back then because everything you're typically hearing on like a 70s radio station or an 80s radio station. It's always going to be the things you've always heard. But if you look, and that's what's cool about streaming services and YouTube is you can find all those things just online. And then if you want to get crazier, ask about, ask your record store owner what they listen to, that they would recommend. You're definitely going to get some obscure stuff. And you'll find that people were crazy experimental in the 60s and 70s. And,
Oh my God.
But they were also, people were able to still craft an incredible pop song that would like be well received now.
So, oh my God, 100%. And it's also referential. It's just a good reminder that, not everything's been done, but we're this beautiful concoction of references from basically every decade of modern music. So it's cool to look back and be like, oh, that's where that came from, or that band you just discovered and you thought was like the craziest thing you'd ever heard. You then realize that they were actually huge fans of all these bands from the 70s that were doing whatever it is,
Yeah, that's a cool feeling to see that progression, that like family tree almost.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Awesome. Well, Matt Martin from Wanderwild, thank you for joining me for an episode of On That Note. It's been a pleasure discussing your album, Music in an Emergency, with you and just your creation process, and always just geeking out about music, which is probably my favorite thing to do.
Sick. Oh, man, Parker, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, of course, dude. Thank you again for coming on, and I'll talk to you later.
Cool. Sounds good. Peace.
Thank you again for joining me for another episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. If you haven't yet, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and you can even leave a comment down below to let me know who you're listening to. On that note, I'll see you guys next time.